Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for joining our webinar this afternoon on how to address pseudocode and algorithms with Michael Evans and David Greenwood. My name is Emma Kapler and I'm the Victorian Sales Manager here at Cambridge University Press. Before I make a start, in the spirit of reconciliation, Cambridge University Press and Assessment acknowledges the traditional custodians of country throughout Australia and their connections to land, sea and community. We pay our respects to their elders, past and present, and extend that respect to all Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples today. This webinar is being recorded and you will receive a link to this recording along with the opportunity to give your feedback on your experience. You can expect to see this arrive in your inbox within about a week. You can ask questions in the chat box, which we will be monitoring throughout the webinar. Or if you would prefer, you can wait until the end. You can ask any questions during the Q&A session, which will be held with the authors and Cambridge team members. It is important to note that this evening's webinar has a large number of attendees and the Q&A time will be limited, so please do feel comfortable to add any question to the chat box. Before we begin, I'd like to introduce you to our highly esteemed authors speaking this afternoon. We have Michael Evans. Michael has a PhD in mathematics from Monash University and a Diploma of Education from La Trobe University. He currently holds the honorary position of Senior Consultant at the Australian Mathematical Sciences Institute at the University of Melbourne. He was Head of Maths at Scotch College in Melbourne and has also taught in public schools in recent years. He has also returned to classroom teaching. He's been very involved with curriculum development at both state and national levels. And in 1999, Michael was awarded an honorary Doctor of Laws by Monash University for his contribution to mathematics education. And we also have David Greenwood. David is Head of Maths at an independent school in Melbourne and has over 30 years experience teaching maths from year 7 to 12. He's run numerous workshops within Australia and overseas regarding the implementation of the Australian curriculum and the use of technology for the teaching of maths. He's written more than 50 mathematical titles. So without further ado, I will hand you over to our first speaker, Michael Evans. Thank you.
Good afternoon. Yes, look, the structure of today's meeting, we'll be talking about the three main components of pseudocode. We'll be looking at the materials that are available in our series, and we'll also look and see what the VCE is offering to help you on your way through this particular part of the course. We'll also talk about possible pathways in, not so much pathways, but ways of looking at these issues in 7 to 10, and David will address that, of course. So they're the things we're doing, and we can actually start now going through. The first thing, of course, is the VCE page, which is the authoritative place to look at for pseudocode. And this particular panel comes from going to the study design for mathematical methods, and just scrolling down and you'll find this panel, and there you can click on pseudocode and you'll get an outline of the VCE's understanding of what's required in this area. So that's a very important document. I don't think everyone's seen it yet. It hasn't been publicised that widely as far as I can see, but the second one down there in the teaching and learning section is the one you should go to, and that outlines the areas you should know and gives you more examples and some questions to work on too. Some of those questions we'll look at tonight too, because obviously if VCE are putting those up as typical questions, that's a good thing to do. So we'll be looking at those later on in this presentation. And you'll see there in the, sorry, can we go back? Yes, on the third panel there, you can see the examination specifications and past examinations and reports. And you'll actually find in there too some sample papers. So go to that site and find the sample papers. And then you'll see what the VCE is offering as far as material for pseudocode goes. Okay, so we can move on gently.
Well, thank you very much, Michael. Hi, everyone. Just a brief mention of 7 to 10. if you do a little search on the Victorian curriculum F to 10, you'll notice that there are 9 results for the word algorithm. And so one example shown here, so the Victorian curriculum Maths, Number and Algebra, number 254, design and implement mathematical algorithms using simple general purpose programming language. Does sound fairly complex, but when you look at the elaborations, we're really just talking about simple loop structures, consecutive numbers, and potentially using geometric patterns, using dynamic geometry, something like logo or turtle graphics to get students used to the idea of using loops and patterns and repeated instructions to introduce them to the idea of algorithms. So this is the Year 7 example, but you'll find 9 different examples across the curriculum from 7 to 10. The other thing I'd like to mention now is we do have a new Victorian curriculum coming, and if my memory serves me correct, I believe there may be something that's published in Term 3 this year for a look, for consideration in 2024 and full implementation in 2025. So it'll be interesting to see what's going on there in terms of algorithms and pseudocode. But we can, for a bit of a hint, we could potentially look at the new Australian curriculum version 9, where there are currently 26 references to the word algorithm. So we won't be in Victoria implementing this just yet, but it's not a bad resource to look at for ideas in terms of algorithms and pseudocode and ways to introduce that at 7 to 10 before getting into the Year 11 and 12 VCE options.
Okay, so we turn our attention to looking and seeing what's in the Cambridge Senior Series. Pseudocode's actually explicitly mentioned as a topic in Specialist Maths Units 1 and 2, but it's also mentioned in Key Knowledge and Key Skills in Methods and Specialists, the other parts of those courses. So it is throughout, and the VCAA has indicated that in actual fact they're going to ask exam questions on it, which is quite important to know, and it will take a little bit of practice for students to get used to that. So in Mathematical Methods 1 and 2, probably the most important start is to go to the Algorithms and Pseudocode appendix, and this provides an introduction to algorithms, including flowcharts and pseudocode. So that's an important place to start, and starts with basic examples. It doesn't go very far, and that's the emphasis for math methods and specialists too, really, is that we don't progress very far through this topic. We just touch on the beginning. Those beginning ideas, which we'll outline in a minute too, are just visited briefly, and that's what that appendix does. It's also carefully done, the bisection method, which obviously can be done with pseudocode, describe that, and probability and simulation, and Newton's methods. And there's also an investigation in the explicitly mentioned in the online material, which you can actually go through and use pseudocode to describe the algorithms. When I say that, it's a good idea too if they can implement code on a device. And we'll be looking at that briefly. I personally recommend Python, which is free software. You can download it on the computer. It's also on the TI, and it's very friendly. And you'll see that it actually matches the VCAA recommended language pseudocode as well. So I'd actually recommend that students have a go at that. It's very, very straightforward. I can say that. It just takes a little bit of care. I'm sure most students could handle it very well. Okay, just to start in that, there's 2 ways of actually introducing the idea of algorithms, in particular 2 ways. I'm sure there's probably more than 2, but I'll actually illustrate 2. One's by an ordered set of instructions. One of the most important things about code is that the order is paramount, and it doesn't matter what you do first. So you can't think, I'll do that bit next, or you'll do step 3 first. And just going through an outline of tasks with steps actually lets you actually carefully go get the idea across that it actually you have to progress through the series of ideas. So this one's the sieve of Eratosthenes, which is a well-known thing. It's something you do in years 7 and 8 quite often. In the old days, you certainly did it. Maybe not so much these days, but it used to be a favourite one. The procedure there is create a list of all natural numbers from 1 to n. In this case, it's clearly 1 to 100. We start the process by cross out 1 and let p be the first prime, and then circle p and then cross out all the other multiples of p. And you can imagine that's an easy thing to code in a sense, that you actually just choose 2 and then cross out all the multiples. And now let p be the smallest number in the list that has not been marked. And then off we go. So the next one's 3, and on we go. If p squared is less than n, then repeat from step 3. And you'll see there that you actually get a loop. So there's both an if statement in there, right? And then there's a loop that takes you back to 3. Okay. Okay, the other way of doing this is to do flowcharts. Flowcharts, you'll find that in actual fact they're messier than pseudocode. But to illustrate loops in particular, I think it's a good picture. So to get the idea of what a loop is, the flowchart gives you the picture. So once you start doing pseudocode, the student should have this in their mind to a certain extent, that bouncing back to the beginning, because that's exactly what happens. You get to the end of the loop and then you bounce back to the beginning. So we're going off there down from the is n less than or equal to 6? Yes, we go bouncing up to the top. If n is bigger than 6, then you just finish the program. You'll notice as you start to go down from putting 1 in n, you hit an if statement straight away. Is n even? That's an if statement. Is n even? Yes, you go to the left. No, you go to the right. And this is what if statements do. You say, if this, else that. So in actual fact, to do some flow charting first illustrates the idea. You'll never want to, students won't want to keep on doing flow charts all the way through because they're time consuming and messy, and you have to get the right shapes. You don't really have to get the right shapes, but the idea is to have the right shapes on the way through. So thankfully, we're not going into that area for with pseudocode. We don't have to, but to illustrate the idea, the flowchart is a very good place to start, just to get those basic ideas. Okay, and mathematical methods 3 and 4, there's another appendix. And then we've got 3 exercises in the revision chapters, which give more questions, on algorithms and pseudocode. So there's plenty to do in there at each stage. So it's really at the end of functions, at the end of calculus, at the end of probability that we actually have sections on pseudocode, plus the appendix. And most importantly, we've added skill sheets onto the revision exercises, onto that 8D, 12D and 18D. You'll find a skill sheet attached with more multiple choice questions, in the case of 12 in particular, which will give your students more opportunity to practice these things, because I don't know exactly, of course, but what we've seen is multiple choice is the favourite method of testing this. So there's collections of multiple choice questions, especially in 12D. We put it up after a few months of the year, I think probably in March, simply because we weren't quite sure what the VCA was going to do in this. So we thought, okay, we'll put the skill sheet up and add to the multiple choice questions. As I go through, though, you'll see that Cambridge has literally, I think, hundreds, just about, of multiple choice questions on algorithms and codes between the books. So it's just a matter of searching these 3 things out, and I'll point out where they are as we move through. Okay, here's one, the 12D. And there's just one question we'll look at from skill sheet 12D. Version 3, I can say people very kindly commented on it to me, so I distributed it to quite a lot of people, and we got comments back on and gradually improved it. And one of the ideas, one of the things that was fed back to me actually was do more with tables so that the students can see how to actually go through an algorithm. And that's very important, to have a table of values there, sometimes called a desk check, so you can see what to do as you go through. So let's just have a look at this one. I actually haven't done the step by step, and some of them will see it, but we'll just go through verbally, starting off with A equals 1 and B equals 1 and count equals 0. And then we've got while A plus B is less than 15. Now we start going down. So what do we get? Count equals count plus 1, so count goes to the value 1. B goes to B plus 1, so it goes to 2. Right? And then A plus B goes to 5. Thanks, Dave. That's good when you actually point the result out. Okay, so the next one, we've got to there, we've got to the end while, and it says, right, I still have to go back. When it reaches the top, it says A plus B is less than 15. The answer is yes, it's only 5. So now we go through again, and this time we're working with A equals 3, B equals 2, and we first of all go to B plus 1. Well, count goes to 2, I should say 2. But B goes to B plus 1, so it goes to 3. And A goes to A plus B. So what we've done is, that's interesting, isn't it? A goes to A plus B, and the answer is going to be 6, yes. And so first of all, we've got B going up and then A plus B. So 3 plus 3 is 6, and A plus B is now 9. That I just jumped the wrong way then. So we've got to 9. So we're still going through the loop. We're still going through the loop. So down we go. Count goes count plus 1. So we're down to 3. And now B goes to B plus 1. So that goes to 4. Right. And in actual fact, we've got A going to 4 plus 6, which is 10. And then A plus B goes to is 14. 10 plus 4. So X takes the value 10. You can see it's the previous value of A, and B is now 4, so we've got 10 for X. Right, and now we do A plus B, and we've got 14, and we're still less than 15. So we come down again, last time. I can say it's last time because we can see what's going to happen. And Y goes to 15. A goes to 15. B is 5 because it came up by 1. And then what's the last going to be? It's going to go up to 20, isn't it? So you finish the loop. So you can see there, you keep on just going around until you get to the end of the while and you check, right? So A plus B less than 15, you keep going. When you get to A plus B equals 20, it's finished, right? And so print AB, what would come out there would be the last two values of A and B, which are 15 and 5. So Y was 15. Okay, and that's it's a reasonably complicated thing to do in your head, but on the other hand, it's not impossible. This one's much easier. Can I just go back for a second, David? Sorry. Just go back one. Oh, yes, thank you. What should be said is there's probably, I think there's something like 15 multiple choice questions on that particular sheet. And you'll find more throughout the books and on the school sheet. So look for those. They came out after the beginning of the year. And as you know, the study design progresses, we'll look at it more and see which way this particular area is going to. Okay, so now we can move on. So what we've got in Specialist Maths Units 1 and 2, and there's a whole chapter on algorithms. There's a whole chapter of algorithms in Specialist Maths 1 and 2. And it's probably worth looking at it for methods teachers too, just to source examples, because they're different. We haven't used the same ones. And you'll see in that not only do we have the chapter, but we've got assignments, skill sheets, and tests. So there's a great source of more questions there. Great many more questions in those. I will say in Specialist Maths 1 and 2, we go on to do lists, which I don't think the VCA will dare ask questions on, and there's no indication they will. So even if you're teaching Specialist Maths, you may like to teach the list because it's a very, very useful tool. But I'd suggest the more saving time method is just to stop when you finish functions. So there's a bit of that chapter, even not everyone would have to do. The thing is, we wrote that the books, of course, before the course was made fully clear. So we've got a little bit too much there, but most of it is absolutely accessible. And you'll see this is a question off a test. And I've just put it there. It's a nice and easy one because you've defined a function a, b. Yes, you have functions on 2 variables when you're working in pseudocode. In fact, you can have as many variables as you like. That doesn't make it hard. So all that does is this function now works for any a, b you want to put in. So you just enter a function. In this case, it's going to be 4, 9, but it could have been anything. It could have been anything. So we just go through. If a plus b is even, then a plus b goes to c. And you'll notice in this case that you're given that you're choosing a, b equal to 4, 9. So conveniently, it's 13. And so it's not even, it's odd, right? 13. So we do b minus a, which is 5. So the end result, return c, that's the end if, you don't have to go any further. There's no looper, it's just an if statement. Return c, it's 5. So this is an example of 2 things: a function, which you can put any values in, and most programming languages have such things. Certainly TI Basic and Casio Basic and Python have such a facility. So also then we've got an if-else statement. So there's only 2 choices here. Sometimes you'll have an else if in the middle if there's more conditions, but there's only 2, so you just go if and then in. Okay, so the answer is 5. We finished that one. And there's the specialist maths 3 and 4. More in there, 7D, 14D, and 17D. You've got the 3 revision chapters, and there's always a section on pseudocode. There's a section on pseudocode in each of those. From what we've seen from the specialist maths 3, 4 exam layouts, a very easy multiple choice question, which we'll do later on. So the expectation is not high, and just the material that's available and methods and specialist maths 1, 2 covers everything else for more multiple choice. So if you're a specialist maths teacher, you can source more questions from the specialist maths 1, 2 course. Okay, now this is something we've gone to the trouble of doing, and I personally think it makes pseudocode with a bit more purpose, basically, that you can move easily from pseudocode to each of these. So you can go to Python, you can go to coding on the TI Inspire, or you can go to coding on the Casio ClassPad. The TI has Python as well as TI Basic, so it's got 2 sorts of programming. And the TI is pretty friendly to Python. I must admit I hadn't done it too many times until just recently, but it actually follows the same structure. And there'll be a slide later on this where you can see the TI Python. So you can do it there, and certainly when you're using the online version of TI, that's particularly straightforward, and you really use the same syntax as Python. I'm not a big fan of the Basic these days on the TI Inspire or Casio, but it works. And you might like to do it. If you learnt that back years ago, you might feel more comfortable working in the Basic. Python's a much more friendly structure, and it's very brief. Not as much typing, that helps. Okay, so let's just go through these are the basic structures of Python. The backwards arrow is the one being recommended in the VCE document and also in our text. I noticed in the specialist maths book, specialist maths exam, the sample one, they use set. I don't think they'll persist with that, but I would certainly recommend that your students are familiar with that particular structure. So rather than back arrow 5, they say set x equal to. One of the troubles with equals in programming is it's got 2 meanings. One's a sign and one's test. So the VCE and their document have chosen to use the back arrow as a way of overcoming that, and they use equal for a test. So you could say if x is equal to 5, it's a different meaning. if x is equal to 5, is different, assigning the value 5 to x. And that's just standard programming. But that was the way it was overcome. In our books too, we use the back arrow, and it overcomes the problem of having two sets of equals in your programs. So it's clear what's intended. So 3 goes to product, and it just means that the variable product takes the value 3. And there's the last one there. You're assigning x plus 1 to x.
Michael, can I interrupt your flow just for a second to field a question from Rob and Cobb that others might be wondering about? Why are we using a back arrow rather than a forward arrow? Is there any, what's the meaning behind the nomenclature there?
The answer is you could have done a forward arrow, but then and 5 goes to x, it sort of mixes another meaning, I think, which it seems safer to choose this. It's certainly not, you could use it. You've got a variety of choices. So I certainly wouldn't say it was wrong using a forward arrow, but this is actually a clearer, distinct meaning. They use forward arrows all the way through maths to mean something else.
Mm.
So in function notation, for instance, you're using them all the time. So the back arrow was chosen, I believe, by the VCE because it just differentiates from other meanings. The forward arrow had that disadvantage. As I say, the specialist maths exam had set. So your student will have to be a little bit flexible in the way they do that until it's absolutely ascertained what's going to happen. I did ask the VCA what's the guidance, and they've said that document that I pointed out at the beginning. I explicitly rang up when I started preparing the talk again just to check, and the answer was that the document is the guide. So that central document is the guide. The sample exams were done in the middle of last year.
Is there a quick way of typing out an arrow like that?
Typing it?
Yeah.
It's in Word, for instance.
Yeah.
There's a symbol in there, just in symbol. You can just choose it.
Yeah.
And click it in. Yeah, so you can use that. There's back arrows, left, right, up, down arrows in Word. So
okay, we're getting some other questions, but we'll keep moving forward and get to some other questions later on.
Okay, when we get to the end of this section, we could do that. Okay, this is decisions in pseudocode, if-then blocks. These are standard programming structures, and we just saw an if condition before. The last one we saw was an if-else. Here we've got a second one. So we've got if a first condition. It could be if it's even, and then else if it's odd, and else follow these instructions. So it could be a third thing that's implied, and you can have as many of the else ifs as you want. You can have as many as you want. It doesn't have to be one. It can be as many as you like. So I don't think we'll see great strings of else ifs in exams to start with, but it just means if x is less than 2, then this. If x is greater than 2, then this. If x is divisible by 7, then this. So you can go through doing all those things. Okay. And loops, there's two sorts of loops that we've got going. One's a for loop where it's specifically specified the number of loops we've got. And they're fairly easy to handle because it just says you just go through and have n iterations. It tells you exactly what to do. With a while loop, you actually have to be careful that you look at the value at the end of the loop. Always realize that it goes through that particular loop, as we saw in that first example, gets to the bottom and says, do I keep going or not? So right at the bottom of the loop, you answer that question. I think in actual fact, when I haven't written out the condition, but there's an end while in the pseudocode. So when you hit the end while, it means that you consider whether you keep going around or not, whether you're out or not. Okay. And thankfully, we've talked about this too, but a function can be anything. So it can be a plus b plus c. It can be as many variables as you like. But it just knows once you've defined the function, it keeps on doing that. So it could be the function is defined in a traditional way, like it could be x cubed plus 3x plus 2, or it can be on multiple variables, and it can be something like 2a plus b, f of a, b is equal to 2a plus b. It can be anything that's stipulated, and then it understands that, and it keeps going. You'll see as I go down that sometimes you define functions before you start the program. So that will be illustrated as we proceed too. Okay.
We've got a couple of examples here, Michael, thank you. So this one is an example of a for loop. So the question is, the algorithm showed on the right will print which value? So what we're going to do is have a look at this for loop where the variable sum is assigned the number 2 to start with, and then we begin the for loop. And you can see by looking at the indentation, the for loop, the first for loop will end down here. And so we start with an x value of 1, and then we proceed with the instructions inside. And so this is an example of a nested loop where while x is 1, we do something else where there's a second loop inside. So we vary the y value from 1 to 2, and we complete this loop before jumping out into the outside loop where x would go to 2 and there to 3. So the question's asking what is printed at the end. Now, as Michael mentioned before, we could use a flowchart to do this, but a desk check or a table is a great way to get started with these types of questions. So let's have a look at this with a table. So we can see the sum is 2 to start with. And in the first loop, we're starting with x equals 1. So while x is 1, we then complete the instructions inside this loop. So for y is 1 to start with, then the sum variable is equal to the sum, which is currently 2, plus the 1 from the x and the 1 from the y. So the 1 from the x and the 1 from the y, plus the existing sum, which was 2, we now have a new sum value of 4. So we move through, get to the end of the first loop, and then y, we haven't finished this loop because y is now 2. And so our new sum is now the old one, which is 4, plus the x, which is still 1, I believe, and y is 2. So our new value is now 7. And we have finished this loop because y has gone from 1 to 2, and we move out of that loop to the outside loop, which has yet to finish. So x is now 2, and we repeat. So y starts at 1 again, and we end up with the sum was 7 plus the x value is 2, and the y value is 1, and this is why we're at 10. So you can see how the order is really important. Students need to be very careful about what they're doing and what the values are, which is why one of these desk check tables can be quite valuable. So continuing on, y is 2, we finished that, and then x is 3. And you can see there's going to be 2 cycles through the middle loop, and our end result for the sum will be 23. Notice in this example that we're not printing these values as we go through. So this code, if this was completed in Python, say by a computer, it won't be printing lots of numbers because it only says to print here after all the loops have finished. So we're only printing one number, and that is the value of the sum. And the previous value of the sum was 23. So
a couple of questions, David.
Yes.
On this, so why? And I think you're getting to this. Why is this example using? Why is in the final line that print sum? Why is sum in boldface and in brackets? What's the reason there?
I answer that just.
Please, Michael.
I think sum should be in italics.
There. Should be
so the answer is sum should be italics, not bold. Print is one of the commands, and it should be bold. So you're right. The question does point out that sum in that case should be italics, not bold.
And this equal could be replaced with a sign arrow.
Yeah, that was the other question. Thanks, David.
Thank you. All right, the next example says the algorithm shown on the right will print the value. So this, unlike the other one, which uses a for loop, this is an example of a while loop. So A begins as 2, and we're going to be repeating this loop while A is less than 20. Let's have a go. So we're starting with a value of A is 2, and clearly A is less than 20. So A now becomes 2 times 2, which is 4. So a new value of A is 4. Now, we've reached the end of the while loop, but we haven't finished because 4 is still less than 20. So we continue the instructions inside this loop until that condition is not satisfied. So A is 4. 2 times 4 is 8. Of course, 8 is less than 20. 2 times 8 is 16. Is the answer 16? Well, let's have a look. A is now 16. Is A less than 20? Yes. So we continue inside. 2 times 16 is 32. Is 32 less than 20? No. So we do not do one more step, and the while loop has finished. After the while loop, we're printing the value of A, and I think the value of A was not 16, it was 32. And so the result would be 32. Going back, there it is, the answer is part E. I think the answer for the previous one was part E, and if there's a question, no, not all pseudocode answers are E. Is that right, Michael? And
as far as I know, they could be, but as far as I know, they do vary.
Good, good. Okay, so that's an example of for loop and a while loop. And I think, Michael, you've talked about an example with a function, please.
Okay, we're moving on to, this is actually not a function as it happens, but it's variables, and it's the specialist maths sample paper exam too. So it's the one they put out. And I'll point out in advance that the F in the print statement should be in italics. So just note that, and I can take the blame for that. But it is something that should be done. You should stick to the italics for the variables and bold for commands. So we've got those two things all the way through. Okay, so let's just go through this to see what happens. It's pretty well straightforward. There's the question. So it's a for loop and a pretty straightforward one. So we're just going to the next slide so we can see the table. Okay, so it's easy to see because you've got the table there now. So you enter and you've got T1 is equal to 2, T2 is equal to 3, and F is equal to 0. So, and they've assigned the value 3 to N, so it's fixed. So you go in, and the first thing you do is you work out F, so it's T1 plus 2 times T2. And you sort of have to go from the first row down to the F. That's how it goes, so in the second row. So you go 2 plus 2 times 3 is 8. Right, so we've reached the 8, then T2 is equal to F. So T2 takes the value 8. And T1 conveniently just stays the same all the way through. It doesn't change. There's no change to that. So down the next part, we're going to work out F first. So you work out 2 times T2 plus the 2, which gives you 18. And to the end, 2 times 18 plus 2 is 38. So you've got to print F. So it's that was the specialist example they gave this year. So there's nothing too much to it. If you notice too that I've actually, rather in error, I've used equal signs instead of back arrows. So I apologise for that again. It's very easy to do that. And I think in actual fact, the VCA question had equal signs too. So it should be F back arrow and then T2 back arrow. And we'll correct these in the slides before they go out, of course. So you'll see them in the correct form when you get it too. Okay.
I'm just going to make the comment, Michael, that notice the print function was inside the loop, meaning that every time we pass the loop here, there'll be printed values of F. So the output won't be just one number.
No, I think the question, it said that the final value, didn't it? Just going back, the final number.
Correct. Mm-hmm. All right, bisection method, Michael, and then I'll do the Newtons.
Yes, okay, the bisection method, that's just obviously a straightforward way of doing this with pseudocode. And since math methods 1 and 2, you can set exercises doing this, and maybe they can use a device to work it out. We'll just go through the bisection method through a question in a minute. Okay, so the other thing is, there was a question, is BASIC better than Python because it does end loops? The answer is, I personally don't like BASIC anymore, but it's up to taste. You can teach this stuff through BASIC on your calculator or through Python. Python's just more elegant, I think, in the way it actually sets things out. I'll go on to it in a minute, but the way Python ends loops is just by ending the indentation. That's what's very important throughout these programs, is the indentation. So let's just go through this one. This is the question on VCE Sample Paper Exam 2, Mathematical Methods. And there's a little bit more to it, but not much, as you'll see in the program, because it ends very quickly. Because when you look at the max that was asked for is 2. So it doesn't take very long to get to the end. That's basically what's happening. If FA times FB, just remember in this case, we've put in F is going to be sine. And therefore it goes through and says if the first value that comes in, let's just make sure I just go through properly. Sorry, I'm just going to do something here, make my life easier. Okay, yeah, so A is equal to 3, B is equal to 5, and max is equal to 2. So when you go through, you'll find that in actual fact, you start off with A equal to 3, B equal to 5. Through it goes, what's going to happen first? Let's look, is FA times FB greater than 0? Well, it's 3 and 5, so obviously you can see everything's okay. I've given you the values up the top there. Sine 3 is greater than 0, sine 5 is less than 0. So they do have to use their calculators to check that. If they're doing pseudocode, of course, if you're working with a program, it does it automatically, but if you're using pseudocode, you'd actually have to check it. So while I is less than max, just remembering that max is 2, right? A plus B divided by 2 goes to mid, and if f of mid is equal to 0, then return mid, else if FA times F mid is less than 0, then mid goes to B. So in this case, we know A times B is less than 0 and sine 4 is less than 0 too. So what you're doing is giving B the new value each time, basically in both cases as you go around. So both times B gets the new value and you're finished. You go around twice and that's it, basically, because it's got a maximum of 2. So probably that's an indication of what the VCA would do with their questions if they won't get them going through a loop 20 times. There'll be maybe 3, 4 at the most to see what's happening, as long as they can understand that process. So you actually have to go through, check that it satisfies the properties, then we get the result 3.5. Okay.
Somewhat similar, Michael, for the Newton's method example, where just a quick reminder, Newton's method is where we're using the tangent of the curve to come up with the next best guess of the x-intercept or the 0. So we start with x0, which is like a guess or starting point, and we use this tangent to create our next one where the tangent intersects the x-axis. And this process is repeated. So it's a good example of where a repeated process is used. And you can see here is example of a pseudocode. So we've got our function and our derivative, which we'll need for Newton's method. And our first our guess is 3.8. And really, we have a while loop going, and there's only really one step in that while loop, and that is apply Newton's method for new values of x. And we keep doing this until we've reached a desired level of accuracy, and that's in the while loop here. So if the function's too large or if the absolute value of the function's too large, and not close enough to 0, then it's going to continue. And we're going to print the new x value and the function value each time. And you can see the results in the table. that for 3.8, our function value is at almost 10. Then we're at about -11. But very quickly, Newton's method delivers an x value where y is very close to 0. And after the past 5, you can see we've met the condition of the while loop. And we're going to finish up, and here is our results here, x 4.53 roughly. Michael, did you want to mention briefly the Python resources?
Yes, just going through to see that, and we've actually
Talked about that one already.
Yes, just having a look at this. The program there, you can see in the left-hand side pseudocode, which we've looked at this before, and on the right is the Python. The loops are finished by the indentation. So this one's very clear because it's a while loop, and it finishes down at the, you can see it keeps on going, and then the return of the function. And the if statement has just indents which are consistent too. So the while statement goes down that left where David's showing with the arrow, just straight down, and then it starts to goes back again. So you can see the structure is very similar to pseudocode, and I personally find that similarity greater than basic. There was a question before, why not use basic, and the answer is, well, you certainly can. It's just really a matter of taste, what happens. And the output there is for the function there, 3.53, 3.5. It just gives you the output as required. So let's move on. Yeah, Python is free. It's one of the great things about it. You can download it, download Anaconda. It's not the sportswear camping shop. It's a different organisation. They like the name too. So download Anaconda and use the Jupyter Notebook or Spider. It is free, easy to download. I've just got a recently new machine, and I downloaded it again, and I think they've made it easier, if anything. So it's web-based, and it works very easily and downloads without thought, really. Nothing complicated. You don't have to start moving things around to libraries or anything else. That's a straightforward thing to do. You don't need a tech person to do it. Look at this question too. Look, it wasn't a bad question, this one. It's on VCE Sample Paper Exam 2, Mathematical Methods. And basically the choice you can see was between D and E. Because the tolerance level, and you want it to be the possibility that next and previous took positive or negative values, so you need to check both ways. So you only had to check D and E. The rest were obviously not strong enough. So then you look and see, well, next is the best and previous. It's going to be the safe bet, and in fact, that was the answer. So they're reasonably straightforward questions once you get used to the notation. I think I took this directly off their paper by the look of it, and that's what we get. And so you can see there I've actually run it in Python too. It works, it just translates straight away, which is a good thing. You have to do a little bit different because of the define the function first. And there's a TI, whoops, that's TI Python. That's TI Python there, and you can see trials free Python, and we run it through like that. You'll see in the last slide, you'll see that in actual fact a TI basic too. So let's just whiz through that too, David.
I think we might be on to the next one now, where, look, very, very briefly, I'm just going to mention year 7 to 10 resources. If you're looking for activities to lead into this type of thinking without getting into too much programming and the pseudocode, you may wish to look at some of the resources in year 7 to 10. The last chapter in the Cambridge books have activities for all three strands of the Victorian curriculum with activities. So number and algebra, there's the added consecutive numbers to match that content descriptor I mentioned earlier. There's turtle geometric graphics. We've got something in probability and statistics as well. For year 8, flowcharts, Excel, and a little bit of basic pseudocode. In Year 9, more flowcharts using Excel and pseudocode and flowcharts. And in Year 10, using some CAS, pseudocode and Excel for a number of activities there. So they are the last chapters in the 7 to 10 series if you're looking for activities to help students think about solving such problems without too much background knowledge. Now we might just move to a question time, given the amount of time we've used up already. I think Scott and Emma will join us to help answer any questions.
Yes.
Scott, do you want to start off with any other questions?
Yeah, there are a few related questions, and some are perhaps a little tricky to answer. I'll just say at this point that questions about specific examples that are in the slideshow, the pseudocode for specific questions that have been shown by Michael and David are a little bit hard to answer live, but once the slideshow is sent out, maybe we can get to address people's specific queries about why, use this notation, why is this this particular number in this line, etc., etc. But generally, there's questions about, for example, there's some concern about how formally students need to know a specific version of pseudocode style, given that it is intended as a general type language. Has VCAA settled on a particular notation that they want students to use?
Okay, there's two answers to this. The document that the VCAA has put up is, I'm assured, is the VCAA guide to pseudocode. But saying that, I think it's very unlikely that they'll be asked to write any length of pseudocode. So at the moment, the most possible questions are interpreting pseudocode. That's the most likely pathway, for example. I can't absolutely predict this, but it seems it would be impossible to mark, for one thing, if they started actually asking the students to write any length of pseudocode, because you'd actually have to be quite flexible in the way you look at it. So the answer is, most likely, the questions will be multiple choice, where you ask for an outcome, or maybe to fill in a line. Like that particular math methods question was not bad in the sense that it said, what could the two missing lines be? But again, the VCAA gave it to you. It wasn't, they weren't asked to write it. So even though that they've established some style in that document, I don't think they'll be asking students to write pseudocode. So it's interpreting pseudocode and picking which is the best, maybe, in a particular multiple choice question. Other things are dangerous.
Yeah. So that a related, question from Mark Rolfe. I'll just read it out because it reflects some of the concern and thinking that's going on out there. Do you think the VCAA is putting more emphasis on students writing code, interpreting the algorithm, or predicting the outcome of the code? You were
I think it's half addressed in the way. It's going to be the last two, just getting an answer out or interpreting. Yeah. It will be given code rather than creating code. Now, of course, inside your school, you can get students to create code to see that they're understanding concepts. But in the external exam, it's going to be very difficult to mark something where they ask you to write pseudocode, because there is not a fixed format for it. That's the whole thing. You can test the ideas by the sorts of questions we've seen. And the VCAA put those up in their sample papers and exemplified what we'd expect in the future. I don't think they'll vary from that. I can't guarantee that. But I think that's a good guide about what you can expect.
Yeah. So that, generally that VCAA document is a very good guide that will answer many questions, either explicitly or implicitly. A question here from Stacey that gets to a similar topic and concern, especially with the size of methods, the methods course. If our Year 12 Methods students have no experience at all with coding, I'm curious how much time we should be spending on teaching them these skills. It feels hard to judge how much depth to go into.
That's a very good question, a very hard question. My answer is there's going to be, maybe one multiple choice question on the paper. Okay, so you wouldn't expect two because that'd be out of proportion to what's expected. So the first thing is you're not going to expect a flood of pseudocode questions. It won't happen. So besides knowing these basic constructs, there is not much else to know. If you go through these questions, you'll see that there's not many ideas in them and it's a matter of just working through. But students need practice still. So it's not without time. It does take some time. I think in the future it will be okay because they will have done it in Year 11 and they'll be able to just transfer the thinking into Year 12 with very little extra work. This year we've got that difficulty. It's the first time through. And yes, they'll have to spend some time to be able to do multiple choice questions. I wouldn't be trying to give them very hard things. That's really the secret of it is the level is going to be, I believe, I'll keep on repeating that, it won't be high. So there's no high expectations from the VCE in the first year. I'm sure they'll keep it simple. They want students to be able to do it. So make sure they can do the sample questions and the questions which are in that additional document and understand everything about them. I think that's my only guidance. It's there's only a few ideas. They have to know them though.
Yeah, and the emphasis that someone put a comment here that perhaps this kind of content should be in a computing course, applied computing rather than mathematics. But Michael, what would your guidance be in terms of the emphasis on mathematics versus the emphasis on students needing to learn how to code in Python?
Okay.
How much coding should be taught?
Look, I mean, one of the things about this, this is mathematics. It's not computer science. It's well away from that. So it is mathematics. I don't think there should be a differentiation mathematics and pseudocode. This is mathematics. It's just, in fact, it's the sort of mathematics that's going on. Universities are saying we'd like students to be able to code, and you'll find that universities are now teaching more in their courses than they did earlier. They expect students to know these things because most mathematics, modern day mathematics, implements code. And certainly this sort of thinking. So it's part of it. Do you want them learning Python in Year 12 for the first time? I would say probably not. But it'd be good to start introducing it further down the school so they're familiar with the ideas. The reason I've said Python is desirable, it seems to not have the same quirks as BASIC. As I say, I'm biased and you might like to use BASIC. But it should be introduced further down the school. For some of your students, they'll just grab hold of it. They'll look at the textbook and think, I can do that, and they'll be able to go ahead with it. Do not spend weeks teaching Python in Year 12. That would be a very foolish thing to do. So my main guide is to use the VCE document and the sample papers, pick out some more questions from our material, and which are simple. Don't go for the hard ones. And you'll find that I think that will do the job. How much time it actually takes, that depends on the student, doesn't it? Some students will be able to adapt very quickly.
Yeah. A couple of questions for you, perhaps, David. One is related to what we've just been talking about. There's a question on the motivation. What would you say to your students either coming into this, maybe we're into the 24th of May, here, maybe it's come up already, but even students who are a little bit younger and yet to start VCE, but are starting to do some of this stuff on algorithms and pseudocode, computational thinking. What do you say to students who are wondering why they're being taught this stuff? What is the mathematical motivation or the relevance of this kind of content, David?
I think I'd start by saying a lot of the problems the world faces these days are perhaps more about computational thinking and algorithmic rather than algebraic.
Certainly Stephen Wolfram would agree with that.
And you only have to look at the popularity of competitions associated with this type of thinking and problem solving, where something like the computational algorithmic thinking competition developed by the Australian Maths Trust, I think has is more popular in Australia than the Australian mathematics competition. And these areas of problem solving are recognised in a range of curriculum, not just in Australia, but around the world. And with the new Australian curriculum, which didn't have any references to algorithms prior to this, now have, 32, it seems to be saying that the world is moving in a direction that heads towards this type of thinking and problem solving. The popularity of programming in schools, I believe, is growing. We have subjects called algorithmics at Year 12 now, which is growing in many schools as well. And as Michael said, a lot of universities are starting to value this type of thinking in their courses. And just further to that, a lot of jobs. You talk to people these days, they might be a physicist, but they're working with algorithms and code. And our job is not necessarily to teach them the language, BASIC or Python, but the mathematics and the thinking behind that. And I think that's probably true at VCE as well, where if you look at these problems that Michael's been talking about and the examples, if students use some basic logic and look at the pseudocode, they can probably get through this without really worrying too much about the syntax. Because there are English words there, there are arrows and there are equal signs, and there are things that are quite easy to understand. And I think VCA focus on the mathematics and the thinking, not so much about the syntax and the actual language being used.
Yeah, well answered. Another question.
Sorry, Scott, we've probably only got time for one more question. We're going to have to finish up really soon.
Okay, no problem. Okay, well, there was a question from Al here. Does 7 to 10 AC textbooks have algorithms as well? The answer is the Victorian curriculum books do currently, in the way that David has described. The new Cambridge Australian curriculum, the 4th edition textbooks will have material in it as well. And no doubt the new Victorian curriculum books, the new edition will have that content in it as well once we see the new Victorian curriculum. One last question for you, Michael, just to clear this up. Is pseudocode also in the methods 3 and 4 exam?
It's in the sample exams.
Yeah.
So what you do is you look at the sample exams and they've got 2 or 3 questions there. And as soon as you see them in sample questions, I'm not going to guarantee that they'll be in this year, of course, but if they put them in the sample exam, they'll be on the Math Methods 3-4 exam too, for sure. They wouldn't have wasted their breath doing that. I would like to reiterate that this is mathematics. It's not computer science. It's far from it, and it doesn't go to anywhere near the same extent as a computer science course does, nowhere near it. So it's a matter of choice about what you put in courses. I think the argument against it is there's a lot in math methods already. We didn't need more. That's an argument against it, which I can understand, but it is mathematics.
Okay, well, thank you. Now, if you have not had had a chance for us to answer your question tonight, please do know that we will answer your question, so you can easily consult or get in touch with your sales consultant, or you can message me directly as well. On behalf of Cambridge University Press, please join me in thanking our authors. Thanks, David. Thanks, Michael. And we're wishing you all a very good evening. Thank you.